Well, after a little break, we're back doing the Open News again, the show that covers all things tech, open source, and Linux. In today's episode, we have the following stories. Deepin OS 20 released, Manjaro 20.1 Mica released, updates to Kde and GNOME have been released, and we're going to be talking about what new features are coming in the yet unreleased update to XFCE. We're going to be covering all of that and more right now on the Open News. So for our first news story, we have a distribution that's received a major update, and that distribution is Deepin OS. Recently they released version 20 of their operating system. It's been in development for a few months, and I have to say it really shows. They upgraded the OS to run on top of the latest version of Debian, which is 10.5 Buster, and they totally revamped the interface. Pretty much everything is different from the previous release of Deepin, and I have to say it's become easily the most visually appealing Linux desktop on the market. Pretty much everything is an improvement from the old Deepin desktop in my opinion. They've added new icons, animations, a revamped multitasking view, and rounded corners on windows and dialogues. As well as that, Deepin 20 now comes with support for both light and dark themes, an improved settings application, more control over the desktop, a personalized notification system, improvements to application management, and an improved installer with support for two different partition methods, full disk encryption, and support for automatic detection of NVIDIA graphics cards. As well as that, Deepin OS 20 now comes with a really cool new feature that I wish more distributions would implement. Deepin OS now has a dual kernel installation. This means that although Deepin OS uses an LTS kernel by default, you can select to use a newer kernel version in the advanced settings if you want to do that. So all in all, I have to say, Deepin OS 20 may well be one of the most impressive updates to a Linux distribution I've ever seen, period. And if you're a fan of Deepin OS, I'd absolutely go and give this a look. And if you want to see a review of Deepin OS 20, I made one while it was in beta that's still fairly relevant now. I'll have a link to that in the description if you want to check it out. But with that said, let's move on to the next story. So for our next story, we have this. Manjaro 20.1 Mica, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, is here with Linux 5.8, latest KDE Plasma, and GNOME desktops. Indeed, Manjaro has released an update to their distribution this week too, and I have to say, there's quite a lot of cool new changes here. First of which, all the editions of Manjaro have been polished up and updated. The XFCE, KDE, and GNOME editions all have visual improvements. For example, the XFCE version of Manjaro, which is kind of their flagship version, has a new theme called Matcha. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly too. As well as that, there are several updates to all of Manjaro's editions, which impact functionality too. Additionally, Manjaro 20.1 also comes with updated package versions. It now ships with the newest versions of XFCE, GNOME, and KDE. Additionally, it also ships with PAMAC 9.5, which now builds AUR packages and installs as many of them as possible in one run, which should make AUR software management easier. Additionally, the newest Linux kernel version 5.8 is used, which should enable lots of new hardware and bring various other improvements. So all in all, I have to say that Manjaro 20.1 is looking like it'll be a fantastic release that's sure to please many Manjaro fans out there. And if you're into Manjaro, make sure you update your system, and if you like Arch-based distributions, maybe go out and check out the new version of Manjaro. So for our next story, we actually have a bit of a first for this show. Windows news. Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 is getting tighter Windows to Linux integration, which although that may not seem to be a big deal at first glance, it's big news to anyone who dual boots Windows and Linux, as one of the improvements coming to WSL 2 is that you can now mount Linux drives on Windows. Now sadly for the time being, you can't access Linux partitions on Windows, so that means you won't be able to access data stored on your Linux partition from Windows in a dual boot situation, but this does mean that if you have physical drives that are formatted for use in Linux, you can read them on Windows too. As well as that, this file system support isn't limited to ext4 as you might think. Theoretically, any file system format supported by Linux should now also be supported in Windows 2 through WSL. So all in all, this should be quite handy to anyone dual booting out there, and it's a pretty cool feature if I'm going to be honest. And for our last story, I've gone ahead and bulked 3 different stories together, as this week seems to very much be the week of desktop environment updates. First, we have GNOME, which has been updated to version 3.36.6, which brings with it improvements and fixes for various things. For example, GNOME 3.36.6 now has better support for high DPI and improvements to the lock screen. Another update in the Linux world that's been released is version 5.74 of the Kde Frameworks, which is a monthly maintenance fix which comes with numerous changes, features and bug fixes, as well as other enhancements to KDE. One of the most requested improvements in this update is that Q widget based KDE apps can now remember their window positions when closed and reopened on X11, which is sure to please a lot of KDE Plasma fans, as this was a highly requested feature. And finally, we have a bit of a progress report on how the development of XFCE 4.16 is coming along, courtesy of 9to5 Linux, which is a fantastic news site that you should absolutely check out, and without them the research for these videos would be much harder. But with that said, the features that are coming in XFCE 4.16 include a revamped About XFCE dialog, client-side decorations, which is a feature that lets apps use their own window decorations, fractional scaling, which should improve XFCE on high DPI and high resolution displays, a new status tray plugin, native support for dark mode in the XFCE panel, an auto hide animation in the panel, a launch new instance option for apps, support for pausing copy and move options in Thunar, a new default applications dialog, new icons for various things around XFCE, and so much more. So all in all, I have to say that all of these new updates to the various Linux desktop environments are all amazing, and I can't wait to try them out. And I also can't wait for XFCE 4.16 to be released. And luckily, XFCE 4.16 is actually just around the corner, with release expected in late October or early November, and all the rest of the desktop environments updates that I just mentioned are ready to try now. But with all of that said, that's it for today's episode of the Open News. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, be sure to tune in next week for more Open News. As always, if you want more details on the topics covered here, I have links in the description that you can follow. But with that said, that's it for today's video, and I will see you in the next one.